You're listening to Rookie Pirate Radio, the official anime and manga podcast for InBetweenDrafts.com. I'm John Negroni.
And I'm Travis Imus.
And today we are ranking all the One Piece villains and debating which one we think is the best across the entire manga. So if you are not caught up on the One Piece manga through chapter 1086, you will hear some spoilers, lots of spoilers. So just a heads up, this is not for more casual fans. If you've only watched the anime, for example, or if you are just starting out, come back to us. We'll be here when you've caught up, and we'll talk to you then. Before we get into it, though, Travis, how do Rookie Pirate Radio listeners become rookie pirates themselves?
Well, I'm glad you brought that up, John, because as you know, One Piece is coming back to us this next week, so now is a great time. Wait. I know, right? But now would be a great time for our listeners to share their expectations or upcoming theories, or even corrections, because we're going to be pulling a lot from memory here today. And one way you can get in touch with us is by sending us an email at rookiepirateradio@gmail.com.
Say it again, Travis. I want to hear it.
Say it again. rookiepirateradio@gmail.com.
Ooh.
But even better than that is we have a Discord server where you can join up, and we have a One Piece spoiler channel and a direct anime and manga channel as well to have discussions with us, not just about One Piece or even just anime and manga, but the entire suite of different types of pop culture that we cover on InBetweenDrafts.com, from TV, books, games, and more. There's been a lot of fun talk in the music channel this week about specific singles, and we have a new Spotify playlist out as well. So plenty of ways to engage with us there, especially there in the Discord. And we look forward to hearing from you.
We do. And I need help. I need help with finding some new anime. I mean, there are a couple that I'm going to catch up on from this previous season, but I need a new slice of life anime, like pretty badly, Travis. It's gotten so bad that I'm reading the Domestic Girlfriend manga. And I shouldn't say bad because, you know, I love it. But I do want a slice of life anime. And Rent a Girlfriend just started its new season. Obviously, I'm doing that out of self-hate, and it's not good for me. So if any of the listeners can help me out, I would appreciate it a lot. I know Allie Johnson has like 20 for me to go through, but I always worry when I do an Allie Johnson recommendation that I'm not going to like it, and then we're going to fight.
I mean, at least as long as you fight here on the show, and we can make it content, I'm okay with that.
Travis, as long as we can monetize your dysfunction, then we should be fine. Actually, speaking of monetizing dysfunction, we got to do this thing. We've got to figure out who is the best One Piece villain. And to figure that out, we have collected a list of most of the primary villains, if not all of them who are relevant to this conversation, who have appeared throughout the One Piece manga, and we're going to be assigning them a ranked tier. You might have seen this kind of thing on YouTube, where you go through a bunch of squared characters and you put them on the tier list. The tiers include, for example, the S tier, the A tier. These are the high ones. And then you go a little bit lower to the B, C, D, and F tiers. And we're going to get all the way to the latest chapter of the manga, and we're going to determine from there our definitive ranking. We're probably going to post this in some format, like on the Discord, of course. I don't know if we'll turn this into a post for In Between Drafts. It probably will depend on how good of a job we do, because if it's not a good ranking, then we may want to avoid publicizing it any further, right?
I mean, if you need to shame us, the Discord would be the place to do it.
That's right. And the place where people will probably shame us will be in how we abide by our own rules. But let's set the rules from the onset, because Travis and I really had to piece this together. We had to come up with a system, and we're going to do our best to go by it. We're going to make our arguments, but here's how this is going to work. Let me walk you through step by step. All right. The characters that we're going through, they have to be more of a villain than an antagonist. Villains and antagonists are not mutually exclusive, but they obviously have a lot of overlap. So we're going to try to leave out characters who are kind of antagonistic, but not necessarily villainous. For example, if they really aren't like a primary obstacle in their given arc, And this actually applies to the second rule: no henchmen unless they serve as a primary obstacle during an arc. So an example of this, we are going to be including Katakuri, for example, who is, I think, a primary villain of the Whole Cake Island arc, but we wouldn't include a character like Blueno just because he fought Luffy, because he really was just sort of like fodder by comparison. And we're going to do a lot of this, though, on a case-by-case basis, because there are some secondary antagonists we are going to include. And if you don't like it, then let us know why, and we'll do our best to accommodate. I don't know. We're also not going to do flashback villains or villains we haven't really met yet. So if it's like a flashback for like a character in like the Fishman Island arc, for example, or if it's a villain like Rox, we haven't met Roxy Zebek. We've heard of him, but it doesn't seem like this is the right time to really factor in a villain like that. We're not going to include any non-canon villains, so no movie villains or filler villains. I feel like if we were going to do movie and filler villains, that kind of earns its own sort of like little special section, if you ask me. And of course, that really just applies to the anime anyway, and we're kind of sticking to the manga here for the most part. We're also going to be doing our best to judge these villains based on how they impact the overall series, so not necessarily arc to arc. So when we look at a character like Buggy, we're not really just looking at the arc where he was the primary villain. We're looking at really where he's been throughout the series and trying to factor that in. I think that Travis and I, we are going to probably differ on what we think in that respect, but we're going to do our best, of course, to compromise and go from there. We're going to go through these tiers chronologically. I'm going to basically tell Travis what I want to do, and then if we disagree, then here are the different options. There are three options. One of us could concede. I could be like, you know what, Travis, you made a great argument. Who would have thought? I'm going to go with you on this one. And the other option is we split the difference evenly. So if I say a character is low C tier and Travis says high B tier, we go with low B tier, basically. So we find a nice little compromise. But if that just is not doable, there is just no common ground to be had. We can't do it. We have a little system we're going to do where one of us banks a favor. So for example, I let you, Travis, get the tier you want exactly. You're like, I want this character to be A tier when I say D tier, right? And neither of us want to split the difference on that. Doesn't make sense. But then I say, you know what, Travis, you get this one. Okay? I'm going to bank this little favor. But later on, I get to cash in a favor. And there is a catch, though. Can only bank 3 favors at any given time because we don't want this to get out of hand. How does that all sound to you, Travis?
I have to say, the favor idea implies to me that you are expecting me to be a real hardliner on a couple of these.
Who knows? I mean, for all we know, we might not bank any favors. Maybe only 1 or 2. I generally don't know what's going to happen. I do want you to know or I do want you to hit me up and let me know if I left anything out, because I sent you the list of villains I want to include. Is there anybody you feel like I got to add, though, at this point?
I'm looking at it. I've been looking at it. I think we've really hit the notes. Because I mean, I don't want to spoil anything, but like an example of someone who I would not put on our list, despite technically being an opponent of the Straw Hats, would be someone would be, I guess, someone like Kuma or Kid, who have been opponents of the Straw Hats, but aren't necessarily, villains in what we are really talking about. So if you're asking, like, where's so-and-so, a good chance is they didn't reach the level we were really looking for in terms of villainy, so to speak.
You know, that's a good point, because I had Kuma on here, and then I took him off, because I really looked at him holistically, and I was like, I don't think we can. But you could make the same argument for another character I put on here. I'll just put it out. I put Frankie on here, and you could make the case of, like, look, if you're going to put Frankie, then you probably should put Kuma, considering what Kuma put Zoro through. So let's say this right now. I say we either do Kuma and Frankie or neither.
Ooh, thrown to the mat.
I say put Kuma on there. Now I'm starting to feel it. I mean,
if you want to do it, I wasn't going to. I will not fight you on it, though. We can have that conversation.
I'm gonna do it.
We're still
suddenly am
pending a
filled.
flashback on him.
I know.
It's admittedly a part of where I'm at on this.
There's never a good time to do these sorts of things, I think is the point of it, isn't there? So I'm gonna put Kuma on here. In the meantime, I mean, Travis, do you before we get started, do you already feel like you know for you who the best villain is, or are you going into this with more of like an open mind, like, you know what, could be anybody?
I mean, I have an opinion on who is the definitive villain, from a sheer just straight up evil sense. But I'm very curious to see what kind of case you make, because I could be persuaded.
Sure. I mean, same here. That's how I'm feeling. I'm feeling like anything can happen. So since anything can happen, starting this podcast should happen right now because we've gone on long enough. All right. So we have our first one here, and I've debated this one, like even including him, but Huguma and the Mountain Bandits, Romance Dawn. He's a villain. He's villainous. It's not technically a flashback because the manga starts here. It starts here when like Luffy's a kid. So I put him on here. Gotta be fair. Right now I have him in like middle D tier, like more sort of like closer to the lowest end of D tier, with the exception of two other characters. Do you agree with that, Travis? Do you think Higuma should get a little bit more respect? Is D tier unfair?
I mean, he is villainous. We know that he has killed people, but I gotta be honest, he's a very easy, just like, oh, I'm just bad for the sake of being bad, so we could do a plot, basically, to kind of set up things. I don't think he offers much in the realm of stories, and he's gone by the end of the very first chapter. If anything, I would move him further to the end of D tier.
I think that's fair. I'm going to do that now. And then if we decide, you know, maybe these other characters are worse, then we can adjust again. But I'm good with that. I'll concede. All right. After Higuma, we spent too much time on him. Alvida. Now, I have Alvida a little bit higher. I have Alvida in the D tier still, but, you know, middle to higher. Do you agree with that, or do you think another case where maybe I'm being too nice to Alvida? I put Alvida a little bit higher. My reasoning is that she has stayed in the story, and even though she is a very one-note villain, I think that she still kind of has a part to play. There's a little bit of potential there, albeit not much. So I'm happy with her where she is. Do you think, what do you think? Too high, too low?
So with Alvida, my issue here, I think you have her in the right spot, but there is the part of me that really questions, because she's been in the story, but has she? When was the last time she had a speaking role in the story?
I don't even know if she has post time skip. I could be wrong and misremembering, but yeah.
I cannot remember to save my life.
Who knows what she's been up to? Not me.
So, we know where she is, but she's just blended into the crowd. She doesn't have, again, this is an issue of impact. I mean, if we really want to be honest, her biggest impact on the story is being the person who put Kobe in a place to meet Luffy, which is not nothing, admittedly.
Sure.
There's a decent chance, for example, the live action One Piece will open with her as the first villain. So I gotta be honest with you. I want to move her into F. I'm gonna be honest with you. I want to move her into F, but I don't know if I can justify it, based almost exclusively on the fact that she does have at least an impact on the story. And, you know, not for nothing, but she was a part of the only effort that got closest to actually beating Monkey D. Luffy. In fairness, for a very, very long time. Yeah, it was in Loketown. Her and Buggy pinned him down, and if not for fate and or maybe a devil fruit, we were done. So she hasn't had impact on the story for so long. So I think I'm going to concede and say you've got her in the right spot. I'm going to take the L on that. Okay,
we can always come back if you feel like, you know what, this isn't right. Something's wrong here. All right. Next up, we have Captain Morgan. Captain Morgan, I have him next to Alvida with only one character in between. So yeah, mid to low D tier. I mean, he's a character that like I appreciate his villainy. The thing I appreciate about him in the story is Captain Morgan is like really our first illustration of how the Marines can be evil and how the Marines can sort of be a more complicated faction than you would expect from a story like this, where pirates are usually the bad guys and then the Marines are the good guys. What are you going to do? But Captain Morgan was a little bit more disruptive to that. This is also a villain that, you know, doesn't show up again really, but gets more than one chapter, and also kind of is the linchpin for Luffy and Zoro. And I think he has an okay design and a funny ego. Not a great villain, but I don't know. I wouldn't put him in F tier. But I'm curious, Travis. Too high, too low, just right?
So again, we have a villain whose main purpose is to put characters in spots we need them in. He is a good contrast to Kobe, again, early on in the story, because our first experience is Kobe wanting to be a Marine, and he's a good guy, and Luffy likes him. The very first island they get to, Marine bad, has an axe for a hand, real piece of work. And of course, Helmeppo enters the story, Zoro enters the story as well. These are both things that Morgan mostly did. That being said, Helmeppo is more of a villain in this arc than Morgan is, outside of being a thing for Luffy to punch. I don't think he does much. I don't think he's super... I mean, he's drawn to be imposing. He ultimately isn't. He's a little bit over-designed, if anything, compared to a lot of future Oda characters. You know, I'm looking at our tier list right now, and I realize he just looks like beta version of Jack, and I don't mean like alpha beta. I mean like, you know, like video game beta kind of version. If anything, I think he does less than anybody we've talked about so far, frankly speaking.
So would you put him after Higuma?
I would. I think I want to move him to F. I think I want to move him to F. I don't think he does anything.
I would split the difference with you on that. So like at the very end of D tier, but not F.
That's fine. That's fine. I could consent to that. I think Higuma just technically getting Shanks's arm counts a little bit more than anything that Morgan himself did. I want to stress that.
I'm okay with that.
Helmeppo, like I said, almost more the villain in that story.
I hear you, and to be upfront with the listeners here, I only have one person in F tier, and I want that to be a sacred place. I do not want Captain Morgan. I don't want him make an F tier look good. That's my sort of baggage. By the way, there is another villain with like a metal mouth, but that we'll get to, right? Yeah. All right. Yeah. So next up, we have Buggy. So Buggy is, I think, our first actual villain, the first real villain in the story. He's not a huge threat to Luffy, but he's dastardly, and you can tell that he's a character with more of a tie-in to the overall series because of his connection to Shanks. And if we were just going off of Orangetown and sure, Loguetown on top of that, I'd say Buggy is low C tier at best. However, Buggy has stuck around. Buggy has been a bit of a force in this manga. He has, time and again, his superpower has been bluffing his way out of situations, making the right alliances. He's an awesome comic relief. And I think the most recent chapter kind of catapulted my respect for him to new heights, where he, the latest chapter with him in it, I should say, where he stands up to Crocodile and Mihawk and goes for that one piece. I think that he actually is a major character. Now, I'm not going to overdo it here too much and say he's an A tier, but I do think he's, for me right now, he's at the very top of B tier in terms of villains. And it's not necessarily because he's the biggest threat. I don't think this is not a power ranking. Okay, you can look at some of the villains I have ahead of him in B tier and be like, John, are you high? I'm high on Buggy. But Travis, I have no idea what your response is going to be to what I have done with Buggy. Also, I just like the symmetry of B tier Buggy.
I am pro Buggy the Clown. I think Oda has said he's his favorite character to write, and it's very clear why, because he's very much a source of comedy. But
he's compelling too.
He is, and that's what I was going to say. Is the way that he exists as comic relief is in such a unique space, even for One Piece, which feels nuts when you think about it. But it's true. Like there's no character quite like Buggy the Clown in this story. And I think that matters quite a bit, especially since we are seeing him take certain moves and actions. And I'm going to go further. I'm going to say he is a mover and a shaker. The world government believes it. He believes it. I'm going to believe it. So if anything, I would move him up. To A tier. I don't know if I'd put him at the top of A tier. That's a little bit far, but he's playing with the big boys. He's
Where
up
in the A tier
He's
would
an
you
Emperor of the Sun.
put him?
I would put him at the end of A tier. I would just inch him up a little bit more just because of who he is. And I'm going to make one final case for you. I'm going to make one final critical case for you. I'm going to call in a piece of evidence in my favor, and that is that when we told Allie we were going to do this episode, she immediately said that we needed to put him at the top of the list.
Wow. I mean, he
Like
would.
a true
if
One
he's
Piece
A tier,
fan.
he's not the very top. I thought I was being.
No, I would put him at the end
generous.
of A tier. I would put him like right over the edge, right over the edge, B into A tier. But I mean, I'm not gonna do. I know the pun with B is good, but I think Buggy deserves just a little bit more than that, just a little bit.
This is tough for me. This is tough because I do factor in the threat level of a character. I'll concede on this point. I thought about maybe banking, but banking's not cool if it's like one slot. Come on, what are we doing?
It's just one little movement up. And if you think Buggy isn't a threat, I'm just saying.
Well, I was about to say it's like he does command extremely powerful people, and there is something to that. So okay, fine. I'm moving him to A tier. I can't believe this is happening. Shanks is looking at us and smiling, I bet. But all right, that's Buggy the Clown. Who knows if he'll soar even higher as the story continues. He started from the bottom, now he's here. All right, next up we have Captain Kuro, or Clawhador, and Syrup Village. Not everybody's favorite arc, but I was kinder on Kuro than I bet a lot of other people might be. I think some people find him kind of boring, but I find him very interesting. I think he's the first example of a cerebral pirate, a pirate with patience, but is balanced out nicely by how evil this guy is. I mean, how heartless he is, I think really deeply resonates. Like, it's so horrifying to watch his character, who had like such a close relationship to this young girl and was like taking care of her and showing like actual affection for her, in the end felt nothing and was completely cold and wanted nothing more than money. And I think there's just something very dark about that makes him, I think, like C tier. I put him really close to the center of C tier. I could be malleable on this. Right now I have him like close to the higher end of C tier, like mid to high. What do you think though, Travis? Because I know we don't always see eye to eye on Kuro, right?
I am much kinder on Syrup Village and the beginning of Usopp's story than everybody else. A thing that I don't talk about a lot is two things with Kuro that I think are interesting. The first is I think he's got one of the more interesting weapons, especially in early One Piece.
They're
because cool. Luffy rarely fights a swordsman. And that's for, I think, obvious reasons. But I love that it's a swordsman in a way that we've still not seen, even in a way that you wouldn't really call him a swordsman, right? And I've always kind of loved that design of just like, oh, he's just elongating his reach with actual swords as claws. I like that. I like that, like the reason he pushes his glasses up, and you see that when he's doing his bit, even without the claws, he does it in such a way as to not cut his face. That's great early Oda character building. I think his characterization's a holdover from back when One Piece was still kind of in its conceptual phase, and it was really a story about different kinds of pirates and their two real big factions were kind of the setup there originally, and this idea of somebody who just wants completely out, just like one more job and then I'm out of here. I don't really have a dream. I'm done with that. And that's an interesting thing in early One Piece. That said, again, he's more a means to an end than a lot of the other villains we have. So I think where you've got him is actually pretty generous, and I think I'm going to agree with you.
All right, cool. Well, yeah, I think it is pretty malleable. If other characters get moved around, I could see him kind of just staying in place or maybe shifting a little.
Yeah, we might see some move in front of him, but I think where you've got him right now, at least in how we've got things going right now, I think he fits in right there. He's definitely more of he leaves an impact a lot more than pretty much every non-buggy character we've talked about so far.
Not too far away from him, I have Don Krieg. So our next villain in the Baratier arc. I think Don Krieg is an interesting villain. I have him like right in the center of C tier. He's kind of interesting. I mean, he's not a big threat, but he, I think, is like a poetic sort of villain. He's a very, again, to what you're saying of like the classification of these pirates, he's the example of an evil pirate who, I guess similar to Buggy, sort of like he uses others to sort of advance his goals because he himself is not that impressive. But you see the limit of a person like that when they try to go to the Grand Line and just get decimated. And I think his fight with Luffy is definitely more sort of like we're starting to see Luffy get pushed a little bit more to his limits. Obviously, he's not a big threat or anything, and Luffy doesn't have to go all out to stop him. But you do sort of see that this is an illustration that there are bigger threats out there and that we're escalating to somebody who really is going to put Luffy on the back foot. So middle C tier. I think that that's pretty fair for the guy, but I could be persuaded to move him a little lower. I feel like though I don't know if I could put him any higher, to be honest.
Oh, absolutely not. Absolutely not. The fight between Luffy and Don Krieg is really raw in retrospect. Because we haven't really gotten to like where the story is. It hasn't really escalated to the point where you've got, practically gods fighting each other. And Don Krieg is basically a walking battle cruiser, which is great because you're right. He's licking his wounds from the Grand Line. It really sets a bar for like, this is what our little protagonist is shooting for, just with his little dinghy and his, the one set of clothes he's got on his back. That's how confident he is in himself. And I think it might be one of the roughest fights in the early series, pretty much until I'm going to say Crocodile, honestly. Arlong, but even then, I think Luffy loses more blood fighting Don Krieg than he does fighting Arlong. I'm gonna leave him. I was gonna say maybe we move him down, but I'm gonna leave him.
Sure. Yeah, we could always move him down.
Now that I'm talking about it. Yeah, now that I'm talking about it, I feel it more.
Yeah, I feel like the same deal with Kuro. Like right now, I think those characters are kind of close in proximity, and I could see other characters moving around them. But we'll get to that, I guess. All right, after Don Krieg, we have Dracul Mihawk, who famously fights Zoro, one of the main villains. And I think, he's one of the main threats of the whole series. So much hinges on this character. His design is god tier. Where he lays in the story, I think, is impeccably challenging and daunting for Zoro himself. Now, at the same time, he's not really a villain. He's sort of just like a bad dude, but we haven't seen him be straight up evil. So right now, I have him in the S tier, but I don't have him that high on S tier. In fact, I have other really good villains ahead of him. I could see other people being like, John, for that design alone, he should be number 2, number 3 in terms of the whole series. What do you think, Travis? Because I genuinely struggle to put him ahead of these other characters because I just don't see him that he's more self-interested than not. I know there's that whole line that Zoro has that he just doesn't have any humanity in him, but yeah, it's just I don't see him necessarily as that character that really we haven't gotten a Mihawk backstory yet. We haven't really gotten to see what makes his character tick, honestly.
Yeah, John, Oda put a Castlevania character in this in the early part of his series, and the way that he introduced this man was to have him absolutely ravage Zoro with the equivalent of a Boy Scout tool. Yeah. even if that was all we had ever seen of him, and he basically took on a Shanks-like status, which he almost kind of does up until recently. The reality is that we don't know his motivations, but he is definitely. I wouldn't call him a friend, that's for sure. I wouldn't even call him a tentative, like, potential ally. There doesn't really seem to be a lot of reason for him to not just continue doing his own thing. I mean, just the one time we have ever really seen him truly fight, and then we saw him in Marineford basically just rolling around with cannon-sized power. I mean, yeah, there's no negatives here. Like the biggest complaint is that we only have more to see. So I completely agree with you. Just look at the man. Look at him with his little cross dagger, and how just destructive he is. On Zoro, that kind of like flash of reality for these guys. You know, and personally, I'm pretty sure that's where Zoro's eye went too, was to Mihawk. So, you know, I look at the man. You're right. Just look at him. He looks like an S tier bad guy.
You like that theory that Zoro gave him his eye in exchange for something we don't know about yet? And that
I was just gonna say he just cut it. He's just like, yeah.
Oh no, there's a whole theory out there. There's a whole theory out there, like, because of the way that Mihawk's eyes are and how it's kind of similar to other characters like Emu, that it's a sign of being cursed, and that he has to like take other people's eyes in order to like keep his eyesight. There's a whole thing out there about this, and I think it's actually pretty compelling.
I mean, number one, it's something Zoro would absolutely do. Number two, it's significantly better than he is Zanpakuto, so I will take it.
I know. You don't love the Mihawk is a sword that ate a devil
is a
theory. That's a fun one. So would you move him up though? Because that's the thing. I could be persuaded, and my thing is, I think he will move up eventually. Mm-hmm.
I think he will too, but you know, we're basically coasting him into this list at all on more or less one set of actions, which is his introduction. I wouldn't even call him I wouldn't even call him a villain in Marineford, because he barely tries. He's not super interested in doing this. You know, he trains Zoro. We don't know what the deal is there, you know, or anything like that. But and he's friends with Shanks. He's not an antagonist of Shanks. He has a cordial relationship with him. So there's more dimensions to this guy, and we're only now just learning like why he was such a big deal in the first place beyond the power that he's displayed. So like, if we're going off just that appearance, just on that one act that he really did at the beginning of the story, I mean, it's just incredible. I mean, it's a thing that has that throws the entire power scaling of One Piece into disarray right out of the gate. But yeah, I would just leave him right where he is, honestly. Because if we come back to this, you know, in who knows, next week, we don't know where Oda's going with the story. Maybe we get a Mihawk flashback out of nowhere. We move him up eventually. Who knows? But he's good right now.
Well, right next to him, I have Arlong. I have Arlong at the end, the bottom of S tier. And I could see people saying, like, that's too high. Like, John, come on. That's too high. It's Arlong. Like, he's not an S tier villain. In terms of his power and everything, like, no. But I think he is probably the most important villain in One Piece. Because if it's not for Arlong, I don't think One Piece would be where it's at today. I don't think people would have stuck around enough in the numbers that they did with this series in order to get to the point where it gets as good as it does. And I think because he is such a good villain, he's such a good antagonist, and I think that he's the best example early on in One Piece of what kind of story we're in for. The weaving of social issues, and this being a gag anime with battle shonen tendencies, kind of becoming more than both of those things. I think it starts with Arlong. I think he is like such a tragic villain because of his origins, his backstory, and to the point where I think later on in Fishman Island, we get even more insight and context for the guy that I think only makes his position in the story in the East Blue Saga all the more extraordinary when you really look at it holistically. So I say S tier. Now, I don't know. Do you think S tier is too high? Travis, do you think A tier is where Arlong needs to go? So long, Arlong, the other S tier villains are saying?
I mean, almost for the pun just now, that might be worth it. But spoilers, no. I think you've got him right. I've said it before on the show, and I'll say it again. The moment where One Piece clicks for most people is Arlong Park. Is the moment where he is his most despicable, and you know it wouldn't happen without him. I mean, he is, you know, compared to these other early villains we talked, you know, I've mentioned a few times, like he's a means to an end. He gets a character to a place so they can meet Luffy or anything like that. Arlong is not that. Arlong is the culmination of all of it. He is the big wall at the end of this first saga. He is a threat beyond anything that they have faced directly. Again, excising Mihawk from that. And most importantly, he is a scumbag in a way that takes a very long time for One Piece to find a match for. Just the emotional raw damage he does to a friend of Luffy's, that's the worst you could do in One Piece. That's the greatest crime, is making a friend of Luffy's cry. So yeah, he's good right where he is, and I don't think One Piece would be the success it is without him.
All right, so that is S tier for Arlong. And for this next one, I actually at first wasn't going to include him at all, because I was looking at Smoker, who is our primary antagonist of Logtown. I kind of looked at him as like really just an antagonist. He's not a villain. And so I at first I was like, I don't think we should include a guy like him. For the same reason we wouldn't include Kobe. I thought about it a little bit more. And I thought about how I have included other Marines on this list who are not villainous. But I do think that they serve an agenda that supports villains, and in certain arcs, I think that they take certain actions that they eventually have to regret and renounce. Now, that doesn't make them great villains as much as it makes them compelling antagonists who struggle with villainy. So for the same reason, I do include Frankie, as we already kind of alluded to. I have Smoker on here. Now, on that note, he's not a great villain. He's not that important. I have him right now higher up in B tier. I think like I've gone back and forth on it, though. It could be he's more C tier now that I'm kind of refreshing my look at it. Since, yeah, I mean, especially as we move through the story, he becomes more and more pathetic. He is a very daunting challenge of like, yeah, Luffy has a long ways to go because he can't even measure up against this user. But at the same time, I think he's kind of cool. He's a cool villain, cool powers. I think like the whole smoking thing, it was like a fun sort of like, wow, like devil fruit powers can really be wacky, right? So I'm a little more perplexed on this, Travis. I kind of want to follow your lead.
So right out of the gate, I think just, you know, defaulting to ACAP is a good rule for determining who makes this list. Solid. Beyond that, though, what does Smoker do? What does Smoker really do?
He gets in the way.
He gets in the way. If anything, Buggy has more direct impact on the, like, just basic day-to-day of our main cast or even the world. Smoker has basically been a pawn for the Marines since Alabasta. And in the times that he has sent, like, even Alabasta, really, his encounters with the Straw Hats have always been more or less on neutral ground, even though he's like, I'm gonna catch you. I mean, he's not. I think he belongs on the list. He's definitely an enemy of the Straw Hats, of multiple people. ACAB rules apply here. He's just not impactful. He's not an admiral. He's not even some of the other Marines that we're going to talk about here. I don't think he's done anything too drastically villainous. And if I'm being entirely honest, if you replaced Smoker, if you just took Smoker completely out of the story and replaced him with, I wouldn't say Garp necessarily, but if you replaced him with literally any other Marine captain, the story would be exactly the same. I don't think he, especially now, has just the same level of impact. I think he's got to go down a tier.
Okay. I mean, I was already kind of feeling it, but I think that is pretty fair. I would put him higher end of C tier then, above Captain Kuro and Don Krieg.
Yeah,
is that cool?
Yeah, I think so. Smoker still has more impact on the story than those two guys, for sure.
Yeah.
I just don't think. I think the fact that he has a tendency to not be villainous does him no favors on this list. What a weird loophole on that. But you know.
Well, hey, as it stands now, I mean, we have more villains in the C tier than any other tier. Before, it was a little bit more split between B and C, but now there are 2 more in C than there are in B. But we do have more people in A tier, thanks to you, than we did before. Right now, A tier and B tier have the same amount. But I do have 6 villains on here that I have not put anywhere yet. You haven't mentioned it, I think, because you know we're getting to it. But I have a bunch of villains that I don't want to rank yet because I kind of want to piece it out with you. But anyway, let's move on. All right, after Smoker, we have Wapple. Now, I did kind of struggle with this because I was like, do I include Miss Wednesday? Do I include Mr. Nine and like all those Baroque work agents? I ultimately decided not to include any of them because they're really henchmen and they're not, because Crocodile is the primary antagonist of that saga. I think this is a case-by-case thing where they are really sort of in league with him and they aren't driving the antagonism of those plots. They're just sort of like henchmen serving as foils, and so
absolutely
I didn't include any of them.
You couldn't even put Robin on there because she didn't do any of the things she was accused of.
Right. I was like, why put Robin here? It just doesn't quite fit, I think, the bill. I think Crocodile is really the puppet master. It's too much his show. Even compared to somebody like, I do include Jack, because I think that he actually has like impact in a way that those other characters don't. So, but we'll get to that too. For now, though, I just jumped right to Drum Island and Wapple, so right before Alabasta. And okay, this is the one where I'm just like, Travis going to try to make me put him higher. I don't like Wapple at all. I think he's too high. I want him in the C tier, but I kept him in the B tier because I do think that he has come back into the story more. And I do think that there is something kind of, I do think there is something to be said about how he's in, I think you've said many times how Drum Island is one of the most important arcs and that it doesn't get enough attention for really what it sets up, not just in terms of Chopper, but also in terms of the Will of D and setting up huge mysteries that are very important. Now, Wapple is a gag villain. He's not a big threat, but he does kind of represent a villain we hadn't gotten up to this point quite yet, which is the nobility and the setup for the Celestial Dragons. I will also say I did not put like Sharlos on this list, which some people might find kind of strange. But I didn't put any of the Celestial Dragons. I don't know if you'll agree or disagree with that.
You did say you wanted to keep the F tier pure, so I understand.
Well, then that was the thing. I was like, they're villainous, but they're not like... Sharlos doesn't do anything really to get in the way. He just causes trouble, and it's like a little bit more of like a henchman of, I think, a greater evil along those lines. But anyway, in terms of Wapple, right now I'm in the middle to low end of B tier, like more closer to the center. I would like to move him lower, like either bottom of B tier to be at the very best, or maybe high end of C tier. What do you think?
Well, so to your point, I do think Drum Island is an incredibly important arc. Little of it has to do with Wapple himself, though. The way that I feel about Wapple, in all honesty, is I feel like he was an attempt to kind of do Buggy again. Not in like saying like Oda's a hack kind of thing, but just like Buggy was so successful, so warmly received. He's a loved character. And I think Wapple is kind of in that same vein. And I think that Drum Island, because it's focused on so many themes and it's doing a lot of groundwork, stuff that doesn't pay off until Wano, even when you think about just the introduction of the human fruit as a concept. And him being very light, breezy, easy to deal with, a very goofy power, those all serve the purposes of that story, but it doesn't make him super compelling. I think he's a right old bastard, to be honest. I think he's more villainous than a lot of the villains on this list, because he's done something... he's done something worse than most of the nobility that we've seen that isn't a celestial dragon. I mean... where else in this story have we very explicitly seen, you know, I guess maybe Wano would be a good indicator of this, but like even in Dressrosa, the idea of not being able to see a doctor just doesn't even occur. You know, it doesn't even come up. This idea that like people can't get at least basic health care or recover from a cold. Meanwhile, WAPL has completely privatized and put under his own care of literally all of medicine on this island. And that's just cruel in a way that is difficult to quantify compared to some of the, you know, straight up baddies in this story. Some of them are just bad to be bad. He's bad in a way that is difficult to rehabilitate, or even like, you know, outside of just squarely punching him off the island. You know, what else do you do with this guy? So, you know, I have a tendency to be like, you know, he is a real villain. You know what I mean? I'm gonna concede to you. I'm gonna concede to you though, because at the end of the day, he's buggy too, and he ain't as good as Buggy.
So I put him at bottom of B tier, and you're okay with that?
But let's put him at bottom of B tier. I feel like as we continue through this, he's going to get pushed down to C. And if you want to do that, I'll concede that too. I think the B and C areas are still, you know, these are still, you know, impactful villains. You know, we're not really talking about the rejects here. You know what I mean? That's true.
All right.
But you know, if we leave him at the end of B for now, that's fine. Or if you want to put him at C, that's fine. I think he can be the, you know, if Buggy gets to straddle the line between end of A and top of B, WAPL can straddle the line between C and B.
The B tier shrinks ever further, but maybe we'll move somebody up to B tier. Who knows? I have one contender for that at least. Okay, so after WAPL we have Crocodile. Now we got one of the big whammies. Crocodile, right now, I have him as the number 2. I have him S tier. I only have one other villain ahead of him, but I do have a few other villains who could take his spot or higher. So, I mean, it's Crocodile. Crocodile, I think, if Arlong is the villain who sort of gets people like, wow, I really like this anime, Crocodile is the character I think people are like, wow, this anime is something special. Because he was the first, I think, legitimate threat to Luffy. The first one who beats Luffy, like unequivocally. And not only that, beats him twice and handily. I think he's the first one that like totally shifts the story into a new territory where now we're talking about geopolitical threats. We're talking about the corruption of the warlord system, Luffy facing one of the great threats of the world, and you get to sort of see this character after Alabasta, after Luffy pulls out a miraculous win, we see him continue to be a presence. You know, one of my favorite moments of the anime, I think we've talked about, is his delivery of the line Mugiwara, like an Impel Down, and like the reemergence of him into the story during the Impel Down arc, and then coming back into Cross Guild. He is just, I think, one of the definitive One Piece villains. I know you've mentioned that there should always be special attention paid to the pirates in this series who have like stereotypical pirate outfit elements. In his case, the hook hand, which, I mean, just the design itself, the whole layout of the character and what he offers. I mean, he's S tier. He's as S tier as it gets. And I think that there's more to come from this guy. I think that he is going to pull some stuff out of his pocket that's going to make us love to hate him all over again. So yeah, I'm firmly S tier right now, number 2. What do you think? Are we gonna argue on the details?
No, actually, I think you've summed it up perfectly. The only thing that I would add is I think a huge reason why he has continued to come in and out of the story in sometimes very big ways is right out of the gate, there's something compelling about this guy. He's like Kuro elevated multiple times up with the added level of he doesn't want out of the game. He has just decided that, like, whatever his, you know, because we've had it mentioned before that he wants the One Piece. He wants to be Pirate King. But he gave up on that dream, and he grounded himself in these geopolitics, in the you know, the money system of the world. And he's decided, I'm just going to be the gangster, basically. And his design completely reflects that. It's an S tier character design again, and people have been fascinated by his demeanor, by his backstory, by the little snippets we've seen in cover stories, in SBSs, knowing he's got a beef with Whitebeard. What's that about? That's never been, it's not like we flashed back to that to really get into it. He hates Whitebeard more than he hates Luffy somehow. Things like that are just so fascinating about him. People think that he's Luffy's mother, for crying out loud. People have thought so much about Crocodile. It's just one of those things. I think it was a home run from the second his character walked into a panel. And you've got him in the right spot. I have literally no complaints here.
I would love to see him in a 1v1 versus Robin and really bring closure to that relationship. Not necessarily like a major matchup in terms of like it's like pivotal, like death or nothing, but I think there would be something interesting to see the two of them clash, right? And to come to a head.
Yeah.
Especially because Robin has grown so much, and it'd be amazing to see the fruits of that. All right. And that is not a pun on Robin's certain growths that are a little bit more regrettable in terms of anyway. Next up, we have Bellamy. Now, until we moved Wapol to C tier at the top end, I had Bellamy at the top end of the C tier. I could be persuaded to move Bellamy up to B tier. I go back and forth with him. He's not a big threat, obviously, but I think he's a fascinating character. He comes in on Jaya. I think he's one of the most satisfying villains to watch getting punched up until Sharlos. And if just for the Jaya stuff, he's low end to C tier, probably D tier, honestly. But I think what they do with him in Dressrosa and how they position just the sad, pathetic nature of who he is, and watching him struggle out of that without losing that sense of like, I think like the lesson he learns about, just trying to coast off of Doflamingo's power and status, and then realizing ultimately he runs. I think that's why Oda made it sure not to just have him be a subordinate of Luffy, because I think that would have defeated the purpose of the character. So I think he's a really interesting villain. I think underrated in some ways, and I don't like using the word underrated, but I in this case I think that it's somewhat apt. So I like having him right here in the C tier. I could be persuaded to move him higher, but what do you think? Do you think he should be lower?
So I'm not going to move him lower, because while his overall impact is light, I think you are right that there's a point being made with him, and I'm gonna be real with you. I think he will return. I think for sure, even if he doesn't commit to being like a Grand Fleet or like a subordinate of Luffy, I think he is one of those characters who, under the right pressure or situation, would come to Luffy's aid. I think he has a respect for him, and I think the difference between what would drive him to go to Luffy's side rather than what was drawing him to Doflamingo's is a very telling thing about both Luffy and Doflamingo. Individually, but Bellamy himself as a follower, I think he's actually ripe for a cover story. I know we're probably never going to get that, but he's one who struck me as kind of ripe for one of those, where we see him kind of learn to be his own person. That said, while I like a lot of what happens with him in Dressrosa, I don't think... to me, it makes him much less of a villain. I think it moves him out of that space entirely. Even though he spends the entire arc insisting he's not, that's him lying to himself. So I don't even view any of that as like him being a bad guy. I think he's just a guy in a bad situation. So I think you have him right in C, but I'm going to say actually move him over Wapol because he's just more interesting overall.
Okay.
I think he definitely earns a place above him.
I'm cool with that.
Since you would have him right next to Wapol anyway, let's put them in the right spot here.
Look at this. We've already made it all the way to Skypiea, and we have not had to bank any favors. We have not been as contentious as I feared, and I'm okay with that. I prefer synergy, but okay. Next up, we have Blackbeard. Blackbeard's a tricky one because he has not really been a primary villain of any arc yet. I think the dastardly nature of this character is still to come, like the full extent of him. Although some people would argue that he is a primary antagonist, a primary villain of Marineford, and I think that's fair. Right now, I have him as number one. I have him number one S tier. Purely purely because he scares the ever-loving you-know-what out of me. If there is a character who I think poses the biggest threat to Luffy, far and away it's him. Far and away. Because he is the dark mirror to Luffy. He is the character who has the same dream as Luffy and is so similar to what Luffy is about, but just taken to a different kind of extreme. That combined with the mysterious nature of his devil fruit, I think the almost inevitability we're sensing of like his conflict with somebody that Luffy cares about, whether that be Shanks or Garp, I think one of them is going to be killed off by this character in order to set the stakes, in order to really push, I think, Akainu out of the revenge status that Luffy has for the death of Ace. And so I think that Whitebeard, you got to hand it to him in terms of villainy too, killing Whitebeard out of really just being in the right place, right time, and kind of getting what he has from like the most evil means, murdering his own crewmate, collecting a crew that also terrifies me. And we have seen in Egghead Island really just like how unstoppable his crew seems to be. I think we're going to see, of course, with Aokiji too being part of that mix, the fact that he commands some of the most powerful characters in the series, without question. I think Blackbeard's the number one. And I think he's going to stay that way. I don't think anybody else is going to supersede him. Maybe somebody is going to come in between him and Crocodile. We'll see. But no, this is the One Piece villain. And if I'm calling it now, I'm saying, like, answering the question, who is the best One Piece villain? I think if it's not Blackbeard, it's going to be, right? That's what I say.
We'll talk about all of that eventually. But you are correct that it's basically inarguable that he is in the tier that he is in, just straight up. The anime completely reinforces this at all given times. There are multiple OPs where they do their own Luffy v Blackbeard fan fiction. He is personally held accountable by Luffy as the murderer of Ace. We see that in Impel Down, where Luffy basically just almost puts it all on the line just to get a lick in on him.
That's a good point. Good point.
Even the 1000th episode, which is relevant because the dub of it, I think, came out this week actually. Where they redo We Are. Blackbeard is inserted in there after Big Mom, after Kaido. In that big like flash that used to be like Buggy and Kuro and Don Krieg in the original. It's Big Mom and Kaido, and then Blackbeard, who does not appear in Wano whatsoever. Because everybody knows.
That's what scares me about him, is like, it's not even that he's stronger than Kaido or even Big Mom. I don't know if he would be able to beat them. But here's the thing. He is scary because he would get to that. Like, he is a character who's growing. He's not stuck.
He is, yeah, and that's a good way of putting it. When you mentioned that he's Luffy's mirror, he has the capacity to continue to get stronger.
Exactly.
Which most villains in this story don't have. They're peak. Like, they're at their peak for the most part. Yeah. Very few of them are really improving. Even with all of Buggy's, failing upward, he's not getting stronger. He's getting more influential. That's a different thing.
Yeah, when you turn in terms of like endless ambition and they're just going to keep getting stronger and stronger, it's Blackbeard and it's Foxy, honestly.
Yeah. Yeah, you think about recent chapters, and this is now we're getting to the real spoilery stuff, kids. You think about how Trafalgar Law helped take down an Emperor of the Sea just an arc ago. And you think about Blackbeard walked away from that fight. He was haggard. He was beaten up. But so was Law. Law had to completely flee. Blackbeard walked away from that. It was abundantly clear that without intervention, Law was cooked.
Yeah.
And not for lack of, this isn't Law slander. Okay, I'm not coming down on him. It was clearly a good fight. But at the end of the day, if Blackbeard had had more time to continue learning how to fight Lost Devil Fruit, that would not have ended well. And that is a very valid capacity. It's a very valid argument.
Well, that's what scares me too, is that I think if there was any character who has an advantage over Blackbeard, it is a character like Law. Considering he is like so smart and strategic, he's not quick to underestimating his opponents, and his crew was primed to fight a heavy devil fruit crew, and that we saw them have an upper hand. And so I think that that's even more relevant to the idea that Blackbeard still took him down. And and also that humanizes Blackbeard to see it's like he's kind of a flawed villain, but he kind of just he claws his way. And that is a very Luffy thing. And that's what's scary about him, the influence that he like draws to himself. And two other things on top of that, his design, incredible, like just a wonderful villain design. And his intro in Jaya, just the unassuming sort of like, here's this character who has this really interesting speech, but then it kind of culminates with like Luffy and Zoro being like, we need to get out of here. Like, this guy is nuts. I just think all of that is like, I mean, it's chill inducing.
Yeah, at the risk of being incredibly cringe, he feels inevitable in a way that nothing else in this story really does. There is just this, you know, everybody has thought it's the crocodile thing. Like there's something so immediately compelling about his presence in the story that we bring him in even when he's not relevant. The anime crew, when they get to do an OP, they bring him in whenever they can because they think about him, and we don't know what they know, but you know, all things considered, you know, Blackbeard hovers over this story like Thanos. He's just been coming for so long. You know, when that time comes, it's gonna be nasty. It's gonna go badly. So I mean, there's literally no way we could move him to the A tier. There's no way. This is this like if we didn't put him in the S tier, we'd have to cancel this whole podcast. We'd lose all credibility with everyone. The inbox would be filled with hate mail, and it would be valid. Some of it would probably be from Blackbeard himself somehow. It would be foolish to do anything but leave him exactly where you have him.
But okay, we're gonna pick up the pace a little bit because we know those of you listening got places to be. Enel, for example, I have him in the middle of A tier. I think he's fun. I love his little earlobes. I like that he's such a powerful villain, and Luffy only defeats him on a technicality. And I think that he's been such a fun fan favorite character since he went to the moon and back. So I think middle A tier is pretty appropriate for him. I know maybe B tier, some people would say, is like, well, he's not that important of a villain. But what do you think? Do you think A tier is too high?
He's not that important of a villain yet. He's not that important of a villain yet. You know, NL is another one that kind of hovers over the story. You know, his design is good. He is a real evil piece of work. And he's so disjointed from anything resembling humanity. He doesn't have motivations. He just has entitlements. He's a good setup for what we would see later with things like the Celestial Dragons. And yeah, technicalities, which in retrospect makes less sense now than it did in Skypiea. But you know, I'm always fine with Pokemon rules in everything else. And he's definitely a better villain than Buggy. So right where he's at is fine by me.
All right, and then after NL, we're done with Skypiea. But so we go over to Foxy. I have Foxy at the bottom of D tier, but not the very bottom. He's ahead of Hajuma and Captain Morgan. I think that that's right. Do you think he's higher, though? Do you think he's higher than Alvida and Frankie?
I mean, on a villainy scale, no. I think he's fine.
I think he's
I have a soft spot for him, but again, he's another gag villain that has less impact or even gags than the other gag villains we've discussed. His impact on the story is zero. He's a de-escalation character. I mean, he does more than Morgan, but only barely.
All right. Well, I'll keep him there for now then. Next up, we have Aokiji. Aokiji I have in the A tier, but I have him, toward the end of it. So he's ahead of Buggy, and he's ahead of another character we'll get to pretty momentarily. He's after NL right now. I could see moving him past NL, just in the sense that I think that him fighting Garp, for example, and him kind of turning to Blackbeard has kind of solidified him as like a severe antagonist. I just kept him kind of low because even though he's so powerful and so daunting, he's not villainous. He has a heart. He's the reason Nico Robin's alive. So I don't like putting him too far up, and I think NL's more villainous, but what do you think?
I'm going to counterpoint you here.
Okay.
I think the reveals that we've gotten from his fight with Garp to joining the Blackbeard Pirates, and specifically the flashback to the Blackbeard Pirates when he was conversing with them and getting along with them, I think he is a character whose entire grounding has changed. Blackbeard straight up asked him, what do you want to do now? And his answer was, join the Blackbeard Pirates, do a bunch of kidnappings. I'm going to kill my mentor now. I think
That's fair.
I think the Aokiji that saved Robin is not the Kuzan that we see now, and I think the name change is important a part of that. I think he is a huge threat, and even putting that aside, the image of him stone cold freezing Luffy is still one of the most chilling pre-time skip images we've got.
I'm already moving him.
Move him.
All right, I moved him past NL.
There we go.
I have him behind another villain that I have him behind 3 villains I don't think I could move him past. But we'll get to them, and then we can deliberate further on that. Okay, so after Aokiji, we have Rob Lucci. We have our next S tier villain, I think, and I think unquestionably. So right now I have Rob Lucci in between Mihawk and Crocodile. So he's like really close to the center there. There's one other villain between him and Crocodile. I wouldn't put him past Crocodile. I put him past Mihawk because I love his backstory. I love his cold personality. I love that he comes back into the story. I love his just like little petty rivalry that he has with Luffy. That's sort of like he can't accept what happened. And I love poking into the character a bit. And I love the Zoan fruit that he uses. I love that like he barely loses to Luffy. Like he's clearly like a villain that Luffy wasn't really ready for, and that makes him so compelling to me. And I just think the whole betrayal arc in Water 7 and him coming out of nowhere is just such a fun moment. So I love Rob Lucci. I know a lot of people do. I think we had a long conversation about him in particular when we were talking about Enies Lobby and our top arcs sort of thing. But yeah, do you think middle S tier? Do you think that's right?
Yeah, I have no notes here. For the interest of time, I won't gush too much more about Catboy here. But yeah, no, he's one of Luffy's toughest fights, straight up. And it's a fight that is so much more emotionally charged. Yeah, I mean, again, one of those ones that feels like a shoo-in.
For sure. Love Rob Lucci. Okay, and then I skipped Frankie technically. Technically, Frankie should have been right before we got to Lucci. But Frankie, I have in the D tier. He's not a real villain. I feel like we kind of have to put him on out of necessity, but he's mid D tier just in the sense that he's not really villainous. He doesn't really get to do anything as a villain, and he quickly becomes an ally. Obviously, he's a great character. Like otherwise, and I would never put him in the F tier, you know. But I do think that he's really fascinating, and everybody loves Frankie. I mean, it's Frankie. He's one of my favorite Straw Hats. I have him in between Alvida and Foxy. Notes on this one?
I would like you to move him in front of Alvida only for what he did to Usopp. Only for what he did to Usopp exclusively.
He did have that sort of, you know, the whole thing with the Frankie house was pretty brutal. Okay, so then after Frankie, go to Spandam. I also wasn't sure about Spandam in this case, but I think because he has such a villainous arc on Robin, I think putting him on here was apt, even though he's really more of a secondary antagonist. This is one of those case by case things, and I don't consider him a henchman of Rob Lucci, right? So for Spandam, right. I have him high up on B tier. I have one person ahead of him in B tier, in fact, and I think that's I like where he's at because he's just so pure evil. I could be persuaded to move him lower because he's not that not powerful or anything, but I think that what he's able to command, calling the Buster Call, what he did to Robin, unforgivable. I could see the argument to move him down a bit, but what do you think?
I think he's petulant. I don't think he's evil. I don't think he's impactful. He is slimy. He makes me want to crawl out of my skin and not in a threatening way. I think he is a walking a display of a mall cop. That's what I think he is. Okay. I think he's a mall cop. I don't think he's super compelling. You know, he called the Buster Call. No, he screwed up and left the phone on. He's literally a Nepo baby.
Sounds like you want him in C tier.
I want him moved down.
Wow.
I definitely want. That's the point I'm trying to get to. I would put him right there with Wapol on the C tier.
Wow.
Just, you know, I guess we'll give him the Nepo baby status and we won't punt him all the way to the end. But
ahead of Wapol or behind him?
Put him behind Wapol. Wapol's more important.
Fine. I don't feel passionate.
Due to recent events.
I'll concede this one because I genuinely don't feel passionate about Spandam So
he's such a mall cop. Like that's the only way I can describe him. He flunked out of he didn't get, he applied for the military, didn't get it. He applied for the police academy, couldn't do the test. So he does security on Sunday afternoons at your local mall that doesn't have any stores left, and he's going to make sure you know it. Like that's the kind of person he is.
I love that this has been such a proving ground for your ACAB tendencies. I love
it. Right. It's great.
That means though, because we've hit the limit and then some on the C tier, so I have to move.
Oh, I have a feeling some folks are going to be moving.
I mean, yeah,
we got a couple there that I think are going to move.
Fine, fair enough. I'm moving one person to the D tier now because I kind of have to, but we'll keep going. All right. So after Spandam, I think we're out of that arc. Well, technically, we still have Monkey D.
No, we got one more.
Yeah, we got one more. Yeah. So Garp, I have him in A tier. Now, again, not villainous, but I do think he is a huge antagonist. Right now, we like him. He saved Kobe. He's fighting Kuzan. I think we're all rooting for Garp, but kind of know that it's probably not going to end great. I still think though that he ACAB rules, like you said, and I think that he serves the interest of a very evil organization and seems to know it. And I just think that he's one of the more compelling characters. And I also think he's a terrible grandfather / father figure, considering how he dealt with like Luffy and Ace. So I have him in A tier right now, like mid to low. I have him ahead of Buggy and one other character that's coming up pretty soon. What do you think?
I think he definitely needs to be ahead of Buggy. I moving him down feels... Gosh, he's too powerful to move down. His attack, actually getting to see him fight for real finally really, really makes it hard. I would say he could go in B tier if that wasn't a factor, only because like I think his villainousness is very complicated, more so than Smoker's, because while you're right, again, ACAB, it's very clear that he's aware of the score and there may be more going on there, I guess is what I'm trying to say. He may be the commander of Sword, for example. We still don't know that for sure. But man, that punch is too cool to not leave him in A tier. I guess the question is do we want him ahead of NL or not? I'm torn about this.
I like NL ahead of him because I don't think he's villainous enough. I think that's the factor he's weakest in, and so I think that we gotta keep him kind of. We
can't move him to B. I want to move him to B because B needs some representation.
Well, that's not
and he's not villainous, right? He's not really, But man, that punch is too cool to move him. It's just. Sometimes you do it the power scale. Sometimes you gotta power.
We have 3 or 4 C tier characters left that I think any of them could make the case to move up to B tier, but we'll get to them, of course. If you're cool with that,
I think we'll leave him. We'll leave him. If you're good with NL ahead of him, I'm not gonna complain. I think we can make that work.
Yeah, you got the last one anyway. Gecko Moria, I have him firmly right in the center of D tier, but I have him ahead of Frankie, and I think I hate Gecko Moria. I hate his character. I hate his design. I hate his powers. I like Thriller Bark. I think that's why I don't like him, because he's just such a bad payoff to like this awesome concept. And we have 2 more villains from this that I think are way more interesting in terms of like their positions in the story. So yeah, I have him firmly like mid. He's so lame that he barely registers afterward, barely does anything in Marineford. He's popped in here and there. He's just never been a compelling villain. I guess that's part of the point. I don't know. You don't feel anything from the character losing. It's just sort of like, all right, what's next? To the point where I feel like Oda had to bring in other villains to make up for it in order for the arc to be salvaged. So yeah, that's where I'm at.
I don't feel strongly one way or another. I like his backstory of being somebody whose dreams were just so crushed that he kind of is this big loser who doesn't even, really put in the work. But that makes him suck. And
then also I think Crocodile's the better version of that, where it's like, it's not that he became a loser, but he did become sort of like,
yeah, you're right.
He had the same sort of thing where he lost.
He's bad Crocodile. That's not a good thing. Yeah. If you wanted to move him into F tier, I'd actually let you do it.
I won't go that far.
I feel so medium about him entirely. I have no defense to run.
I think being a warlord and being as despicable as he is has to earn him some points. And I think that he is a real villain compared to like Alvida, Foxy, Hajuma, and Morgan. So Captain Morgan. Next up, we have Oars. Oars, I have him B tier. He's a total B tier villain. It took the whole Straw Hat crew just to fight him, and they couldn't even win. Oars is coming back later. I think that he is like one of like the first sort of like he was like the first villain that took the whole crew and working together at that. I think he's really fun. The design is really cool. The lore that he sets up that comes up later. I mean, yeah, Or is firmly in the center of B tier for me. He's below a couple other characters, but I think I like him right where he's at. What do you think?
I think we're good to leave him where he is, though I do think he's going to be forced down later.
I could
by at least one other character that you've put in B tier. I think somebody's going to move him.
Oh, okay. Well, we'll get to that then. I'm curious to hear you out on that. Okay, next we have Kuma.
I think it's time. Yeah.
Oh, is it Kuma?
I mean, if we're putting him on here, I think Kuma is just way more compelling as a character overall.
I'll give Kuma this. Like Oars, he fights the entire Straw Hat crew, but in the sense that he beats them all instantly. but that's the thing, is like he does that, and he also nearly kills Zoro. He could have just wiped the Straw Hats out. But that's the thing, is like he's not a villain. He like is sort of like working for villainous people. He's never a primary antagonist. There's still a lot of stuff we're still learning about him. We're in the process of learning his backstory, and he helps the Straw Hats a lot.
This is why I was like torn about putting him on the list, but you've put him on the list, so you forced my hand on this.
This is my doing.
And at the end of the day, he is the one person who has genuinely delivered a full knockout to the Straw Hats.
Yeah.
If Garp has to be on A tier solely for a single punch, Kuma is the guy who is KO'd. He is the only to point, like, you know, we get the narrator coming in to make the point. He is the one to do the completely devastation.
Fine, I moved him ahead of Oars.
There you go.
All right.
Told you it was going to happen.
It's fair enough. Okay. Kizaru. Kizaru, I have him in the A tier right now. I mean, he also was like, he would have decimated the Straw Hats if not for Rayleigh. I think that there's something compelling to me about his like lazy villainy, in terms of like, or his lazy justice, really, in the sense that he really is he's a toadstool, but a really powerful one. And I think he's a character who's like, there's something very off-putting about just the way that he reacts to certain characters, the way he reacts to Beckman, for example. I think that he's as high as he is. I have him at the bottom of A tier, just ahead of Buggy, just because I don't think we've seen him be that compelling so far. But and he is a primary villain of Sabaody. But I would just say that, like, just for his sheer power alone, and I think that the tease of him to come an Egghead and what I think he's going to possibly do, I'm scared of the guy, quite honestly. I think that he's one of those undersung sort of villains that's going to have a moment. And so purely on the vibes of that, I have him a bit higher than maybe someone would expect. I could see an argument to move him down just because like we still are sort of in a waiting period with him, but I think he's pretty, I think that he's pretty important. But what do you think?
So this is where we're going to disagree a little bit. I do think that Kizaru stocks are about to pay off. Whenever we make it back to Egghead, I think we will finally get something of him. That being said, while powerful, you know, I think his demeanor doesn't serve him as a threat level very well. And I think it's very telling that he is always the one that gets dispatched to do the errands. He's the one sent to Sabaody. He's, even in the movies, I know we're not really talking about the movies, but he's always the guy actually sent out to do things like, oh, we got to go to the island to deal with a thing. I guess I'm going to go do that. Oh, I got to be an escort. I guess it's fine. At least I don't have to get my hands dirty. You know, he doesn't seem, you know, like you said, he's not as compelling as some of
that's
the
thing.
villains.
It's like an evil bureaucrat is such an interesting kind of story.
If he was an evil bureaucrat, I would say you're right, but he's not even that. He's more of a slacker than Aokiji was, which is insane. You know, he will take any opportunity he can so far to put his hands up and go, oh, I guess we're not fighting anymore. I don't know. There's not enough of him for me to really say, you know, hey, this is an A tier character, because, like, yeah, we may get something pretty good of him out of Egghead, but we have no idea when or how that is going to happen at this point. And unlike Blackbeard, where, like, so much of the story has been invested in spending time making sure we know he's going to be an impact, or even characters like Doflamingo or Vegapunk even, Kizaru's just kind of here. He's kind of the Admiral equivalent of an errand boy. He's the guy you send to go clean up a mess real quick without getting his hands dirty. But, like, I don't know. He's powerful. I wouldn't put him in C tier, for example. But I think B tier is a healthier place for him while he works on himself. He kind of gets his gear.
It almost sounds like you want him, like, between Kuma and Ors.
I think I would either put him between Kuma and Ors or just ahead of Kuma.
I'll put him just ahead of Kuma. That feels okay.
Yeah, I think that's fine. We could put him there. He could spend some time working on himself. Maybe take an online class. Maybe change his diet. Something to give him a little bit more energy, a little bit more pep. And then
now A team B tier are tied once again.
There we go. All right. See, we're getting there. And then, once he's found himself, we get to Egghead, maybe we move him up. Provisional, promotion. We could talk about it.
Next, we have Boa Hancock. I have Boa at the bottom of C tier. She's barely a villain. She's not even a villain of her own arc. She's very powerful. I think she's a great character, but she so quickly goes from villain to hero. I mean, a similar thing is like Frankie, that she becomes an ally so quickly. And I also think her character gets infantilized so quickly in terms of like being totally based around what she thinks about Luffy. But I think the character kind of suffers a lot from that. So I like Boa a lot, but I mean, I think bottom of C tier is pretty generous. I could even see a case for D tier, but I think that she is such a cool character and her powers are so devastating that I think she deserves C tier status personally.
I mean, she's definitely one that I would not have even put on here, to be entirely honest with you, because you're right. There's, she's a threat for about 30 seconds. And then never again, at least in how we're defining villains, really. I think she's fine where she's at. I'll grant you that one. I'll concede that.
After Boa, we have Magellan, the primary antagonist of Impel Down. Magellan, I have high up on B tier. He's my number 2 right now. Magellan nearly kills Luffy. Super impactful because if not for him and his poison powers, like Luffy would have died later on in the story, honestly. It's a challenge that Luffy needed to face. He's a very dangerous villain. I think he's a very fun villain. I think he's one of the first ones that I think strikes that balance between he's very, very threatening, but also a gag villain at the same time. And I love that balance a lot. I think he's the character that I wanted Gecko Moria to be. I don't mind silly villains. I want them when you see how threatening they are for it to just to be balanced better in terms of the writing. So Magellan, I think, is one of the stronger villains, honestly. So I like him high up on B tier. But we never talked about Magellan before. I don't know where you think of him.
I really don't feel one way or the other about Magellan. I think you've made a pretty strong case, if anything. I don't really have any negatives.
It really is. It comes down to like he's fun. He's just fun to watch.
He's
fun to read.
He's fun. Impel Down's a great arc. He's a certifiable threat. It's really starting to feel like the B tier is just the power scaling tier. For me. But if we're doing that, he is pretty up there. Now that we've moved Kizaru down there, I think that's a little negligible. But I think you've made a good case to put him where he's at. I'm not going to fight that.
All right. After Magellan, we go more to the Summit War itself. And we'll start here with Sengoku. Sengoku, I struggle to even put on the list as well. But I do think that if we have Garp, like we kind of have to have Sengoku, but I have him pretty low. I have him just ahead of Smoker right now in the C tier. So he's in between Spandam and Smoker. I don't really care either way where he is in the C tier, but I do think he's firmly C tier. Extremely powerful. One of the more powerful characters in the whole series, but I just don't think he's not villainous. He's kind of a Garp sort of thing, and he's retired. And I think that I think the point of his character is his power that was never really moved in a impactful direction, and that's kind of why he was phased out of the story the way he was. So C tier. I don't think he's that interesting. I don't love his devil fruit power. I know that some people think it's cool, but I think it's kind of weird. He's one of the first mythical Zoans, but yeah, I don't know. I don't feel strongly about him.
So I think I'm going to agree with you on C tier for Sengoku, but I am going to make the case to move him up above Bellamy, and here's why. I think Sengoku, more so than any of the other Marines we've discussed yet, is truly the embodiment of ACAB. And I say that because after Summit War, he is so full of crap. He acts like this whole thing is a huge tragedy, that it's this big, big mistake that everybody did. And he finally retires, and he's sick of all of this. And Sengoku has presided over everything that had led up to that point. including the Summit War. He is specifically responsible. Everything that happened, from deciding we need to execute Ace for the crime of being the son of the Pirate King, a thing that you could have, I mean, all you had to do was call up your buddy Garp, and this problem was solved without having to execute anybody. You could have said, "Hey, you got Roger. You know anything about Roger's kid?" No, you decided to do a bunch of crimes instead. You presided over all of these terrible, like, everything from Morgan up to the Marines getting paid off by Arlong. Literally every nasty Marine thing, Sengoku is complicit in directly as his role. And I think he's full of crap, because then what does he do? He just goes and starts training more Marines, and he starts telling them all the lore and everything. It's great when we need a lore dump from our guy Sengoku. Love hearing about the Rocks pirates. Funny he doesn't get in trouble for talking about that, even though God Valley got erased. That's interesting. But I think he's an example of power not understanding its own responsibility. Like he is the system, and he thinks he can reform it. And no, that's not what's being told here. He continues to uphold it. His presence just inherently does it. So yeah, he doesn't need to be any higher. He's not necessarily a threat or anything like that. But I do think Oda is meant to say something about things with him.
Hey, well argued. You convinced me. So I moved him to the front of C tier. Very good points. I like that framing of the character a lot, actually. All right, moving into, we're getting close to the end game here. We're doing well. Next up, we have Akainu. Now, I think some people might look at Akainu and be like, well, S tier villain, right? He kills Ace. He is, I think, the primary antagonist of Marineford. Like, he really is the driving force of what's so despicable about the Marines. Beats Kuzan in his 1v1. Truly a threat. I have him in A tier. I have him at the top of A tier because I think of his impact on the story, and I think, following the ACAB rules, I guess. But I just don't see him as an S tier villain. A, because I don't think he has a very good design, and I don't think his powers are that interesting. And I think that he feels just way more of like a functional obstacle than he does a compelling villain who really comes into the story in a really severe way for me. He still is compelling. I think there is something to be said about his actions and how he goes along with Sengoku, becomes a fleet admiral, but because we haven't seen him do anything since, he's been basically like doing the Sengoku thing and being a fleet admiral, and I think maybe some of that stuff is to come. If anything, we've seen him be more measured and just like angsty and bratty, and I like what Oda's doing with his character. I like the framing of it in the story of like he went from being this mega threat to sort of just being like an office jockey, and I like what Oda's kind of starting to say about that. But I think that keeps him away from S tier for me. And I think you said it best, that really it was Blackbeard who came out of that arc with, being the sole antagonist to Luffy for what happened here. And that Akainu, I think, ultimately is going to be more of a blip. So some people might look at this and be like, come on, you got to at least put him ahead Arlong. I wouldn't fight somebody super hard on that, but I think he's firmly A tier for me. What do you think?
I think I agree. If anything, and this is not a case for moving him, but I would say, everything being what it is right now, knowing exactly what we know about the story in this moment, I would say Aokiji is more of a threat by being a member of the Blackbeard Pirates than Akainu is. And that's not to say that Luffy would not immediately take the shot if he had it. Right. There's still a lot of people who want to see that fight. I would love to see that fight to get even. But I do think if you were to sit Luffy down and actually have the conversation about, like, who's responsible for Ace's death? Who really goes down for that? And it's Blackbeard, 100%. He was blaming Blackbeard long before anything. Because when you think about it, if everything had gone the way the Marines had intended it, a couple of random dudes with scythes would have been the ones to do it, right? Like, they would have just, cut Ace's head off, and like Luffy's not going to hunt them.
Well,
down,
even before
right?
that, I mean, Ace wouldn't have been captured by Blackbeard. Luffy would have been.
Yeah, exactly. It would. Yeah, it all goes back to Blackbeard. Yeah. I think Akainu is. I think the desk jockey thing really hurts his stocks. Honestly, he just doesn't feel nearly as threatening. The world is about to be in a place, I think, in the story where he does eventually get out from behind that desk. But again, hypotheticals are just that. They're hypotheticals. What if the sky was purple? Who cares? Doesn't matter. Leave him in A tier.
All right. Next up, I think that's it for the time skip. Let me double check here. So yeah. So then we time skip out. I didn't include Blue Jam because that's more of a flashback villain, and we got to draw the line somewhere, I think. I do have Caribou on my list, but I didn't do an image of him. I decided kind of at the last minute not to include Caribou because he's not really a villain, and I Return to Sabady's doesn't really have a villain in general. So
yeah.
I decided against that. I know it was in the original list, but I'd rather just move on to Fishman Island.
Okay. Here we go.
We have
I'm going to let you have your moment. This is your moment.
Hody Jones, F tier. The only F tier villain I have, because I think that he is the worst villain that Oda has ever concocted on multiple levels. Entire video essays have been made about, I think, why Hody doesn't work as a character. I don't think they go far enough. This is the character that I think threatened to really derail the whole series because there was so much hype and anticipation for Fishman Island. I feel for Oda because to do this arc that was set up for so long, from Sabady Archipelago through multiple arcs in between, we finally get to Fishman Island, and it's an arc that I do like in certain respects, and I think it does a lot of things pretty well, and it serves a great purpose of like, it's just fun to see all the Straw Hats together again. It'd been a long time, and seeing how much they'd grown. But this character who is just Arlong, but not just less interesting. Arlong, if Arlong was like, I think the version of like an East Blue villain that is like less interesting. The whole sort of thing where he's like doping, the whole like just the ship falling, and he's clearly not a real threat to Luffy. He is a sleepwalk of a character, and I hate his design. I hate his personality. His powers aren't interesting. I think there were other characters in this arc who would have been better villains. I wish so much that Hody Jones had been a red herring, no pun intended, of a villain. Instead of, that actually was a good no pun intended, to be fair. Instead of that, right? If they had found a way to weave in one of the other characters in a Water 7 type fashion and be like, oh, here's what's actually going on here, in a way that would have been instructive to the story. But as it stands, like, Hody Jones is such a boring sort of like both sidesism, we already went through it with Arlong. And I think that in general, the way that Hody Jones doesn't even have any sort of like tie-in with Nami in a real way, I mean, all that stuff falls apart for me completely. So yeah, F tier. He's the worst One Piece villain by far. He's the reason Fishman Island, I think, would have been one of the better arcs if not for him.
Okay, so I got the preview of this, a little bit of behind the scenes for everybody. I got to see this image before we started recording. I have been trying to figure out how to parse this the entire time we've been doing this, because as you know, I feel very differently about Fishman Island than a lot of people. I think the expectations set by fans is what really set it up for failure more than anything else. And I'm not going to make this the Fishman Island apology tour, because we already did that. You can go listen to our favorite arcs episode for that. So here's what I'm going to do. This is how I'm going to resolve this. This is my favor.
Oh, thank God.
Can keep him right there, and we'll do F for favor, and I'm gonna go ahead and bank that.
All right.
And we will call that resolved.
The first one, and I'm sure you will use this favor for good and not evil, considering that this whole conversation is about evil. All right, so that's Hody Jones. Caesar Clown. I have Caesar Clown in D tier. He's ahead of Gecko Moria. He's not the worst villain. He's far from the best. I mean, he is despicable. What he does to those kids, horrible. But I think ultimately he just doesn't have that much of a presence in the story. Now, I could see somebody making the argument maybe he's more C tier because his, the Mads thing, he sticks around in the story. But I don't know. I mean, everything after Punk Hazard reduces him to being such a one-note character. He kind of helps Chopper, so then he gets a little bit of like, oh, he's kind of, he's not good, but he's, kind of neutral, I guess, in some ways. He cares about science, I guess. I don't know. I just never felt like the character was fully slotted. I don't think Oda fully understood what he wanted to do with the character, because it's almost like he made the mistake of making him too evil from the get-go, so he couldn't do a redemption arc for the guy in any meaningful way, and maybe he didn't even want to. So, and his gas powers are just like, well, Smoker's literally in the arc too, and so it's kind of like, I don't know, he's just a very kind of a lame villain, honestly. So I have him D tier, not the lowest. I mean, he's ahead of Gecko Moria. He has a couple other villains ahead of him right now. What do you think?
So you hate Hody Jones more than anything. Caesar Clown is my Hody Jones.
Oh man,
I hate this character. This character single-handedly is the only thing that has ever stopped me from reading One Piece for a period of time.
I hear you.
I hate his presence. I hate his characterization. He is everything that is bad about characters like Wapol and Buggy and even Gecko Moria, all rolled into one. He is insufferable. He's not even slimy enough for me to actually believe that he's the one who did that stuff to those kids.
Yeah, I agree.
I mean, like and then Oda makes the baffling decision to keep him in the story for far too long.
Because I think he knew he wanted to do the Mads thing, and so he was like, I gotta keep him.
And I know, but I'm gonna be real with you. If Mads didn't include Caesar Clown, it would change nothing.
I'd be interested more in like if Queen and Vinsmoke had a reunion kind of thing and done it that way. But
yeah,
maybe they still will.
It is if it and the fact that like Caesar shows up at freaking cover stories, I hate him every time he comes up. He is insufferable. I think like this is not a criticism of the vocal performance, but I think that even the voice actor understands that he is just supposed to be unlikable in every sense of the word. And so like even in the anime, I can't stand it. You're right. The powers are the only thing that's interesting because of that little technicality with pulling the oxygen out of the air, and then that ceases to work. And he's useless. He's supposed to be like a devilish design, but he's a clown. We have a clown. He's a good clown. We don't need another one. I find him this annoying amalgamate of bad ideas that just will not go away. And the longer he's in the story, unlike most of these characters where the longer they're in the story and Oda gets to flesh them out and we get to spend more time with them, they become more compelling, or we like them more, or we even grow to love them. I loathe this character so much. Blackbeard got Ace killed. Akainu actually did it. But Caesar Clown is just so much more deserving of jail, honestly. So for me, I want him in the F tier. I know you want to keep it pure, but I hate him that much.
One option, you could bank your favor. I would want to split the difference.
I'm saving the favor.
I would want to split the difference. I would put him at the very bottom of D tier past Morgan. But I need to save the favor. I feel like I need to save the favor, so I will let you do that. I almost feel kind of bad. Maybe
I hate him. I hate him.
Maybe later,
I really do.
Maybe later, I'm gonna be so like it's gonna be a delayed move, and I might be like, you know what, Travis, you get Caesar Clown in the F tier.
He is the definition of overstays his welcome.
All right.
Caribou is way more interesting comparatively. They could have just kept Caribou on the ship, which they did, but
all right.
I don't know.
In the background of this, to let you cook, I moved a couple more villains that'll come up later.
I see that.
I did,
and I like where you're going with that. I think
I made a late stage decision based on what you were saying about Caesar.
This episode's long enough as it is. It's fine.
Sorry about that. Okay, next up we have Doflamingo. Doflamingo, A tier. In fact, I could be persuaded to move him past Akainu. Right now, I have him just past Akainu. Doflamingo, I mean, seeing Luffy knock that smile off his face was brilliant. He's in the story a lot. I think he's going to come back. His backstory is brilliant. The way that he sets up the whole Dressrosa arc, I love his design. I love his powers. I love him. He's such a great villain. One of the best villains. In fact, as I talk about it, I'm like, man, maybe I do move him past Akainu, quite honestly. Should I do it?
I mean, you should move him past Akainu and then a little bit further up that list.
Want him in S tier? You want him in S tier?
This is my favorite. This is my favorite because you see, I think Doflamingo is the definitive One Piece villain. Blackbeard, of course, again, I don't think I could make the case, even though I personally, just from a likability standpoint, would say, Blackbeard's a great character, but we've seen just how bad Doflamingo is. I think Doflamingo represents the actual evil that Oda wants to depict in this series. I think that when he first introduces the character in the meeting of the Seven Warlords, I don't even think we could have fathomed the kind of nonsense that this man would represent. You think about the Oda took a celestial dragon and made him worse, and made him this vile, completely irredeemable piece of work.
It's almost single-handedly why I left Sharlos off the list, because I was like, he really is. Doflamingo is the real epitome of what Sharlos represents.
The cruelty that he represents, not just in Dressrosa, but in Law's backstory, in Corazon's history, in his own backstory. Doflamingo, he is so vile that the pain that he does suffer as a child, you almost don't think about. You think about what Corazon went through, but you don't think about what he goes through. You cannot sympathize with him. A lot of people say that he's the crocodile who succeeded, and that's absolutely true.
Yes.
And it does make his defeat that much more satisfying. But I do think he is, Blackbeard will probably be the most powerful, the most potent overall villain in the story. But we see the complete picture of Doflamingo now over the course of One Piece, and they're just, even looking at the characters we still have to look at, none of them to me compare. In terms of just, you are the most villainous character we have seen. We know some things about some other characters. We know that this crown will probably eventually be taken. But the reality is that Doflamingo is a character who knows the truth of the world in One Piece. And what he decided to do with that was, I am going to raise the earth. Like, not only knowing the truth and, wanting power or prestige everything was in service of wanting to just be. I mean, frankly, he's like the Joker, but what if he was good as a character instead of this amalgamate of anarchist memes that the Western characters become? I mean, he calls himself Joker even, but it's just there's just, he is a heightened kind of villain. I mean, even just like the impetus of like what his subordinate does to the people of Dressrosa is like, to this day, it's like one of the most messed up things in all of One Piece. The things he enables, the pies he has his hands in, and it's not for his own gain. It is simply because he thinks that the entire world has wronged him, that it revolves around him, and he's not done. And he's not done. And it is just this poison. You think about the celestial dragons. What we learned at the very last chapter of One Piece, we've met a character who looks like just as devoid of humanity, and yet Doflamingo, is a perversion of that perversion, which is just insane to think about. But that's really what he is. So I would put him in the S tier. I would put him high up on that S tier. I think he really is the best villain Oda has, completely delivered to us. Again, barring things like the fact that, Blackbeard exists, but like he is my tippy top, honestly. Okay, so you do get to cash in a favor, which means you can put him anywhere in S tier that you want, and I will go along with it. That is your right as an American One Piece fan. So, I am gonna put him over Crocodile. I'm gonna leave Blackbeard at the top so that we don't get hate mail. All right. I'm not a fool. I'm passionate, but I'm not a fool. Passionate, but not a fool. I love it. That's a very Travis kind of saying. All right, so I am moving him now, and S tier gets another fallen angel. And Travis, because you did mention something that convinced me, it's like there is another character I was debating putting on here, and I have decided based on how you positioned that whole thing to add him to the mix. So we'll get to that. All right. There we go. The real spoilers will come. Yeah, you were waiting for this one. I was wondering too if you were going to be like, all right, John, you need to get into shape. But okay, I don't even know where I'm going to put this character yet. But okay, in the meantime, after Doflamingo, we get Fujitora, who also gets
you know, a lot to do in this arc. Look, Fujitora, he's not a villain. He's an antagonist. He gets in the way. I think that he has shown to be a more righteous character. Oda says he's like, what, humane, righteous justice, whatever it is. I have him in B tier, though, because he's devastating. And I do think that, like Smoker, he is certainly an enemy. He's not a character who is going to, you know, he will clash with the Straw Hats as needed. Very powerful character, too. Compelling, interesting. I think he's B tier, lower end of B tier. Right now, I have him past Ors and ahead of a couple other characters. I could be persuaded, though. Travis, how are you feeling about him?
I think you're right. I think you got it on the right spot. I will note, too, that while Fujitora comes off in the main story as, you know, someone who we think might defect or do something righteous, I think he's more complicated than that. And the only reason I say that is because we know why we don't know why he blinded himself, but we know that whatever he did it for was he witnessed something atrocious. And I'm going to be real. It's a safe bet he was complicit in whatever that was.
I think you were going to say is like he helped Oda write the Caesar Clown character.
The Caesar Clown character. His crime was inventing Caesar Clown. and I mean, I think that's something we're going to learn. I don't know if it's going to be like a full flashback or anything like that, but I mean, we don't know how much time the story has left. But, you know, in terms of like, you know, he was drafted in the military. I'm not going to hold that necessarily directly against him, but we know he's probably not defecting, guys. I think he's a baddie. I think, you know, just a different kind of baddie, kind of like a Smoker. I think he's good where he's at.
Yeah, I'm with you there. I'm with you. Okay, so after that character, after Fujitora, let's go on, and we're getting close to the end here. We have Jack. Jack I have in the D tier. He's the primary antagonist of Zou Island. Also a character I wasn't sure about including because it also meant we would have to include two other characters. It's like, I don't know if I can. Ultimately, I let it happen. I did what I did. No regrets, I guess. Jack, right now I have him in D tier. He's ahead of Gecko Moria. So he's one of the top ones. He is powerful. He gets his comeuppance. I think what he does in Zou is horrifying, and that he is a real threat against two very strong characters, Dogstorm and Cat Viper. And what he does to the citizens there, the way he uses Queen's technology to hurt all his people. I mean, it's terrible. So, but at the same time, he sucks. He's just not a very good villain. I don't love his design. His powers are kind of boring, and he just is like a wet blanket of a villain afterward. I genuinely believed he should have died in Zou. I think it would have been more impactful, and I think Oda was worried that would make the Beast Pirates seem too weak. But I think that he should have perished after what happened there, and that we shouldn't have had him factor into Wano at all. Just my 2 cents. I would have much rather had more Big Mom villains in the mix instead. That's how I would have done it. But I am not Oda, which hence I'm not nearly as awesome. So there you go.
I don't really have any complaints about that. I think he's perfectly placed for all those reasons that you mentioned, and he fits in right ahead of Gecko Moria, who has somehow taken more L's than Jack.
Very true, very true. Okay, so after Jack, we have Big Mom. This is one I struggled with a bunch. I think some people would look at Big Mom. I mean, I think it runs the gamut. I think some people look at Big Mom and they're just like, she's S tier. You know, like one of the top villains. Other people look at her and they're like, honestly, she had so much hype. She should have been S tier, but really she's more B tier. I think some people would argue because ultimately she's just not a character that really Luffy doesn't get to beat her. You know, I think some people would be that simplistic about it. I split the difference. I think she's an A tier villain. Right now I have her as number 2, right behind Akainu and ahead of Aokiji. She is extremely powerful. I think the fact that it takes so much, it takes all that Law and Kid have and then some just to get her out of the fight. It's not even that they necessarily knock her out. Like they do, but they don't. And it's already been promised to us that she's not really defeated. She's going to come back. I think that her backstory is really good. I think that like the whole thing with like her eating all those children, I mean, my God. And I think those are the arguments where people will be like, she's so powerful. Luffy can't even fight her in the Whole Cake Island arc. And so she's S tier, some would say. I think the reason I don't have her in S tier, and maybe you'll disagree, I just don't think she's that good. Like she's just, I think her powers are cool, but I just don't think they fully went all the way with it. And that's kind of why I think that she has to come back in the story, because I think there's got to be more to her character. I feel like it's not that she was beaten too easily. It's that she was beaten without there being that last twist to her that would have made her defeat all the more satisfying. So that's where it really comes down to me. I think there's a reason Oda didn't let her be the main villain of the arc where like this stuff happens. That had to be tied into Wano, and that she falls into Kaido's shadow, quite honestly. So that's why I have her A tier, high, but not S tier. Do you agree, disagree? What's going on?
I think I'm going to agree. I think you make a good point. I also, and this is one of those rare times where I am going to criticize Oda just a little bit. I'm not a huge fan of how Oda uses fatness for characters sometimes.
Yeah.
He's not remotely the worst character, like the worst writer for this by any stretch. And, we have Luffy who eats and eats and eats. You have characters like Bonnie. Like, it's not like, being hungry or even being gluttonous is wholly framed as a moral failure or anything like that. But you think about even going as far back as Alvida, it comes up from time to time, and I don't feel great about it. I think that part of her character really undermines everything else. I know that it kind of is, you can't really have Whole Cake Island without some sort of levity of this. I do subscribe to the idea that the emperors are supposed to be mirrors of sorts to Luffy's dream, and who he is as a person. So Big Mom representing kind of that impulsiveness, that desire to make a found family, and his own gluttony as like a dark mirror. I understand all of that thematically. I just think it could have been accomplished without making her the way that she is. In such a way as like it's a caricature is what it feels like, and I think that really holds her back, because that's what she ends up getting locked into even when she does enter the story in Wano. What is it all about? It's all about the food, and like it really drags it down. It really hurts her. She's very powerful, though she is a threat. It takes two of the worst generation to even take her down, and as you noted, we do not have a confirmation of death. But Akainu killed Ace, man. That puts him over her. I'm sorry, it's true.
Yeah.
So yeah, I agree. I just had to, all of that to say, yeah, I agree, it's fine. But I do think it's one of those things that should be mentioned in that conversation.
Cool. Well, if we agree on that, then I guess we should move on. All right. After Big Mom, we have Vinsmoke Judge. Now, this is a character I have in C tier right now, and I kind of have pretty low in C tier. And as I was doing it, I was like, he could go higher, higher in C tier. I don't know if I would be willing to put him in B tier because it's Judge. Like, he does pretty bad things. He's Sanji's dad. I think a lot of the terrible stuff he's done, as terrible as it's been, I don't feel like the shoe's really dropped with this character yet. And I don't think he's like very powerful or has a very compelling power set. He's more compelling in sort of like the structure of how he is as a villain. So right now I have him in between Kuro and Don Krieg. I like him there, but I wouldn't fight you if you wanted to tweak this a bit.
I think I do want to tweak him just a little bit, because I think he is personally more scummy. Like, it's not that the things he's done overall in the story, it's just the way he's scummy to Sanji specifically. Mm-hmm. It's kind of an Arlong thing, and I would not move him to S tier, obviously, but like the characters who mess with a Straw Hat specifically, they really got it coming, like I think he's a more impactful villain than like Kuro for sure. Like, even just inching him up that way I think would be justified. But if you wanted to put him like between Spandam and Wapol, I think you could justify that too. Just the abuse that he inflicts on Sanji, and if I might be so bold, his other children. Yeah. Even though they were born the way that they were born, the fact that he did that modification on them, that he robbed them of the ability to have emotion, I think that's cruel in a way that the simple machinations of Don Krieg wanting to be a warlord just doesn't compare. You know what I mean?
Fair enough. All right. So then I moved him in between Wapol and Spandam at your recommendation. I'm good with that.
There we go.
All right.
Couple of monsters hanging out. That works.
After Judge, we have Katakuri. who really is the main, I think, antagonist to Luffy in this arc and Whole Cake Island. Katakuri, I have him number 1 of B tier. Very powerful villain, very important villain to Luffy. I mean, he really sets the stakes for how tough it's going to be for Luffy to actually defeat an emperor, because he genuinely, like, it's kind of remarkable that he really wasn't able to beat Katakuri. Not really. It was so unbelievably close, and it was just based on Luffy's persistence and wearing him down more than anything else. I think his powers are really cool. The Mochi Fruit is really interesting, and like the way he, his design is like so awesome. The reason I don't have him higher is because I just think the whole fight itself and like how he operates in the fight is done that well. It's a very tedious fight. And I think that's partly is because Katakuri as a villain doesn't have a ton of juice, and Oda had to really drag it out in a way to sort of make the other stuff with Big Mom and the cake and all that work. So I don't love the way his villain was executed, and the fact that he hasn't really factored it in the story much at all since. I don't feel super strongly about Katakuri, but I do think he's a good villain, so I have him tip top of B tier. What do you think, though?
I was thinking about moving him up to A tier because I think the anime really helps that fight a lot, to make it feel quite a bit more dynamic. But I think you make a good point. I think I'm going to agree with you, actually.
That's like, it's tough, man.
It's tough, but I think you're right. When I really sit down and think about it, you know, it's a very fascinating fight, and it's again one of those really grueling dust ups that Luffy has sometimes. Like, but it's in the league of like the first Rob Lucci fight.
Yeah, it is.
And yet, if you were to try to tell me like could you remember all of the details of what happens in both of those fights, I would remember the Rob Lucci fight 10 times over before remembering too much.
Same.
I think the thing that I remember most about the Luffy Katakuri fight to be like an actual piece of choreography is in fact from the OP during that fight in the anime, where Luffy's like kind of jumping around and dodging him, and there's this like really cool Sakuga turn that Luffy has as he like goes into gear third. Like that I remember more than the actual fight. So
well, the thing that always stuck out to me, I think the future sight stuff is the coolest thing about it. I think the fight started to perk up a bit when Luffy finally was like learning how to do it on the fly, and that was kind of cool. But then I think part of it too is like he beats him by going at a Snake Man, and it was just such a like, oh, okay, all right.
And Snake Man's cool, but it's over pretty quickly after he busts out Snake Man.
Yeah, and it's not super clear of like why he had to do Snake Man exactly. Like they explain it, but again, it's just not that great.
Yeah, I think I'm going to agree with you. Yeah, I think you make a good point.
If he had
been
more villainous, like if he had like, I don't know, like attacked a cat or something, maybe I'd move him up.
That's a good point too. He's actually kind of a wholesome being when you get right down to it.
He eats donuts. He's kind of chill. Okay, next up we have Kaido. Kaido is the last S tier villain I have on here, although we have at least one other person in the running for S tier, but I just haven't placed them. Kaido, I have right now directly in the center. I have him after Crocodile. I have him ahead of Rob Lucci. I don't want to move him. I think that this is like perfect for him. He's a great villain in terms of like his design, his power set, how daunting he is, how he is sort of like Crocodile in the sense like he beats Luffy over and over again. And they really stress how tough it is for Luffy to just match up with him. And they really sell, I think, a lot of interesting things about this character. I love his like weird code of honor that isn't very honorable. His fight with Odin. I think that his whole sort of like weird warped sense of the world and what he brings to it, what he wants to do. He's so unbelievably imposing. The downside of the character is his backstory never really comes into it. I think Oda was exhausted by the time he got to the point where we had to like kind of see more of Kaido. The anime though has been fleshing him out more. We've been getting a little bit more detail in his flashbacks, particularly with King. So I put Kaido here right in the center. I'd like to keep him there. What do you think?
I think I'm going to agree. Mostly on the backstory thing. I think if we had gotten and I don't know if it was Oda like making like necessary cuts. I personally think that we're eventually going to get the Rocks story, and that's going to lend us a lot for Kaido. But we didn't get it now, and that was really disappointing for a lot of people. I think a lot more people than I expected. just came away from that very annoyed. I think Kaido overall is a show don't tell character. I think everything we need is on the page right there in what he presents in the present day, or to a smaller effect, the Odin flashback. But it makes it really hard to put him over like really, really enriched characters like Crocodile or Doflamingo.
Agreed.
Or even Rob Lucci. We know more about Rob Lucci's history than we do about Kaido's, even though we've been told so much.
I know we're way over time, but one of the things I wanted to see from Wano is I wanted Luffy to beat Kaido like early, and for it to be revealed that Kaido wasn't really the main villain of the arc, and that he wasn't really as powerful as everyone thought, and that somebody like King was actually the character who was going to turn around and be like, he was the one working everything from behind the scenes, and then he becomes the actual villain. And like, I wanted something out of Wano that was a bit more subversive, is what I'm trying to say, because I just felt like it was so simple. It was so just like, Kaido's just this big, powerful character. So what? And I liked the idea of like Luffy does everything he can, finally beats Kaido, but like if it had been early in the roof fight, only for King to show up and like basically wipe everybody out and be like insanely powerful, and to tie into Lunarian stuff too. I like fine how Wano ended and everything, but that was just one of those cases where I got way too into the like dreaming basically of the fan fiction. But I just wanted to put that out there into the universe, that there was a little bit of like a me sort of being like, could it happen? Could it happen? No.
So what you're saying is what you really wanted was for Luffy to beat Kaido and then have one of God's Knights show up and just do what Kuma did in Thriller Bark.
Honestly, like kind of. Or just like have some kind of like character swoop in and be like, you think Kaido is the real emperor? And then like have like a recontextualization of everything that Kaido has been through, down to like him beating Odin. And it being revealed there's more to that than we thought. I think that would have made Wano really feel like something beyond what it is, but we don't have to. This is not the conversation.
Yeah. I appreciate that idea, but I also read all of Naruto, so like that particular type of twist
that does have a little bit of Naruto to it, doesn't it?
That particular twist is like, no, Naruto did that, and let me tell you, that really hurts the ending.
Fair enough. Okay, Orochi. Orochi's the next one here. I mean, he's evil. He sucks. No one likes him. Get him out of here. I have him in C tier. I have him between Don Krieg and Boa Hancock. There's something interesting to him as a villain in terms of like the legacy of it, how far he goes with his villainy, how hard it is to kill him, what he does all the characters. But you get to the point where like not even Kaido cares. He like cuts off his head and like he's just running around and no one cares what Orochi is up to, including Kinemon. We're just like, okay, but where is if anything, should I include what's his face, the traitor? I'm blanking on his name for some reason.
No, because he's just a subordinate.
You're right.
Gone on.
Okay, yeah, he's a henchman. You're right.
Orochi strikes me very much similar to Spandam in that, they're both very cruel, terrible people, but at the end of the day, they're petulant more than they are, threats or even like particularly villainous. Like if Orochi hadn't been like nepo babied up, through subterfuge, like the Shakespearean plot that puts Orochi in his place is far more interesting than he is. I do appreciate that he is one character that Oda decided, no, he doesn't get to live. We don't get to do gags with him later. He is cruel enough to that he has to go. He is one character that Oda actually straight up like, no, he's too evil. But like, he sucks, man. Like I would maybe move him above like our East Blue block that we've got going on in C tier.
Okay. So ahead
over there
ahead
by
of Smoker?
Spandam.
Okay.
Yeah. If only because he is just, he's such a slimy piece of work. You know what I mean?
That's fair.
But he is not. He's not interesting. He's just evil for the sake of being evil, and that serves the story's purpose just fine. But like, man, does it, like, for these purposes, he sucks.
Yeah. Fair enough. I added Conjuro. I put him between Morgan and Caesar Climb.
Fine.
I hate him.
Just so we don't have to debate him.
Yeah, exactly. Okay. Next up, after Conjuro, we have King and Queen. I want to just do these as a block. I put them in B tier after Fujitora. I think they're good villains. I think they serve their purpose, but they are henchmen. And so I don't want to elevate them too much. I think they're better than C tier. I think that they, again, they serve their purpose. I think you could almost make the case that Queen is a better villain because Queen really kind of had more of a command of that second act as the antagonist to Luffy. But I mean, ultimately, he doesn't do that much. So, and I think King is way cooler. So I have it the way it is. What do you think?
I do agree. King is way cooler. I would almost. I think you're right, by the way, but I would almost rule of cool King up to A tier just by
Wow.
Again, rule of cool. But you're probably right.
I would like to, he's like an A tier villain design and construct, but there's just not enough of him, I think, to justify it.
We don't get enough. And again, I think Oda's just keeping some secrets to his chest that he doesn't want to play out yet.
Sure.
And that really holds back King in particular.
100%.
So
I hope he comes back.
Yeah. I would love that. I thought he was so cool. What a great fight, him and Zoro.
Yeah.
What a great brawl. And the anime made it so awesome.
They nailed it.
Yeah, we can leave them. They're good. They're good where they're at.
We only have a few left. And the next
we're almost there.
Yeah, we're almost there, finally. Thank God. Ryokugu. I have him I have him before Fujitora, so I have him after Ors in the B tier. So he's kind of close to the center. I think that the reason I have him as high as I do is like he's very, very like villainous. He is just like an Akainu fanboy. I think we're going to get more fun stuff with him. I like how he gets undermined at the Reverie stuff. I like that he kind of does kind of like defy orders, and there's something interesting about him. His powers are cool, and I like that he's in the story because we need another character like him. I have him ahead of Fujitora just because like he's clearly more of a villain, and I think that he's going to come into play more and more. So yeah, I have him here. He's not that interesting yet. But maybe he will be later. I think that fits though, since we have Kizaru ahead of him, to what you were arguing earlier. So are you good with the placement?
I think I am. I think there's a case to be made for moving him up B tier because we got that big, that big fashy talk out of him when he appeared at Wano, right? But we don't really know the extent of what he could do. Between Kizaru and him, we've got two, really big, heavy hitting fighters. Again, the B tier really feels like the power scaling tier, and at the end of the day, all we've really seen Green Bull actually do is heal Wano's land and get absolutely windmill slammed by Shanks staring at him too hard. So, yeah, he's good. He's good where he's at, I think.
All right. York is next. How about that? York, I have top of D tier. York is not a great villain. I mean, the reason I have York high up on D tier is because they do play up the traitor reveal, I guess. There is something interesting about York's intentions. The smile is really creepy. And the idea of evil Vegapunk is interesting. But I mean, I could almost be persuaded to move her down. It's just, I'm kind of too neutral on York to like really move her past characters I more vividly hate, like Gecko Moria. And I think there's more of the character to come. So I think top of D is fair because she could prove to be higher. Like she could prove to be like, oh, maybe she's more C tier. I don't see it coming, but I don't know. Where do you land on that?
I think she's good where she's at, if only because the murder mystery really does help that a lot. I've come around on the reveal, I think, over time. I think you and I both had some issues with it when it happened, but the more that we've spent talking about it and that we've seen of like other things going on in the world, I think I like it more where it's at. Yeah, you're right. We're probably not getting like a big like threat from her going forward just because we know who's coming. But at the same time, I mean, she's better than Moria. She's more menacing than Moria. She hasn't taken an L. So,
right.
Like that's better than Jack. So yeah, I think I could change my tune on that, but right now I think we're good.
And then that brings us to the Gorosei, Emu, and Figureland Garling. I want to create a new tier called W tier, and the W stands for WTF. Maybe just call it WTF tier. I've grouped them into their own little square.
It's a
because it's too early, isn't it? We have seen these characters do some stuff. Garling to the least extent, but I just don't think we can really judge yet where Emu and the Gorosei land. We've only gotten, as recently as the last couple chapters, glimpses into what they're capable of, and it's so vague. We don't know their true motivations yet. Gorosei is the only one where I could see, and I grouped them together because there hasn't been enough distinction between them. I could see you make the case that Gorosei have been in the story long enough, and they have had enough moments in the story to be like, you know what, let's put them in, let's say B tier or A tier. It would be either one of those tiers, I think. Probably B tier, because just genuinely there just hasn't been enough of them. But I like the idea of a WTF tier because it kind of hints that we don't know where to put them yet. But what do you think?
Yeah, we could put it there because, frankly speaking, we're still settling in from just how, like, the thing that we have seen them do, are war crimes. Like we're right out of the gate, outside of like commanding things or just kind of existing, or in the case of Emu, literally just standing around.
Yeah.
Immediately the actions that they take are war crimes. A king is murdered. They unleash a super weapon on an island because it's nearby. Like where they're going to be the tippy top of villainy for sure. Where, but like, it's hard to define that because like it's on a scale that's so different from like what any villain on this list even represents. It's kind of hard to quantify right now until we get more information.
Right. Yeah, and Garling especially, because it's like, where would we put? We haven't seen Garling do anything.
It's the last page we've seen.
Yes, exactly, exactly. So I think this is pretty fair. I grouped them together. I put them all in the WTF tier, and with that is the entire list. So right now we have Blackbeard as number 1. We have Doflamingo as number 2. We have Crocodile number 3. Only one favor was banked, and heartily so. I'm looking at the list again. I mean, do you have any notes? Is there anything that's kind of sticking out to you? Like, did we make the right call? Nothing's sticking out to me. I'm feeling good.
Caesar Clown is still where I don't want him to be, but other than that,
Caesar Clown's all the way at the bottom of D tier. So as it turned out, we ended up adding more to B tier. So right now there's more people in S tier than A tier. Way to go, Oda. We have 7 people in S tier. We have 6 in A tier. We have 9 in B tier. I want to stop counting. We have 1 less in C tier than D tier, it looks like. So, I mean, that seems right to me. I mean, it seems right to me in the sense that, like, there have been great One Piece villains. There have been lots of, like, less great One Piece villains along the way. But I feel like what makes the manga work is that you can find just great villains, like, scattered throughout. It never feels like we go a super long time without a great One Piece villain, right?
Definitely.
Well, we will share this out on the Discord. I literally was designing it in real time as Travis was probably watching. Like, man, am I going on that long? John is just like goofing off with the illustrator here. But let us know what you think about our list and who you think the best One Piece villain is. I could see some people say it's Doflamingo and be like, you guys are putting Blackbeard ahead too soon because he hasn't really been a villain yet. But I've made my argument. I will stand by it. Are you sure you're good with Blackbeard as number 1? This is your last chance, Travis.
Yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, I think it would be, all the things we talked about, right? Just the way that he hovers over the story. He's done many villainous things already. It's not like we're just like, we're expecting him to do a thing. We know quite a bit about him. And the things that we don't know about him are not just like teases. They're not just Oda going to hee. They are fundamental things that we know are going to need to be resolved alongside things of the story. Why does Blackbeard have 2 devil fruits? Well, we're still learning right now. things about devil fruits. The answers are going to come, and they're intrinsically tied to this world and these final conflicts as we're in the final saga. So like again, personally, I think Doflamingo is my favorite villain, but that's only because he's fully formed. I think for the purposes of what we're really doing here, Blackbeard is inevitable. Simply put, like, it's cringy to do the meme, but that's really it.
We will be back next week, if I can speak, to talk about the newest One Piece chapter. 1087 is due to come out next week. Thank you so much for everybody who's been sticking with us as we've been working through this hiatus, delivering definitely different kinds of things. It's been a lot of fun, Travis, but I'm ready to get back into One Piece. I hope we get at least 2 chapters in a row, if not more. And of course, we'll be catching up on the latest chapters from Travis's perspective, since Travis didn't have a chance to talk about 85 or 86, 1085 or 1086. So we might be able to fit that into, but hopefully it won't be over 2 hours like this was. That was inevitable.
Yeah, I'll talk much faster.
All right. See you, everybody.